Hi class, previous video had introduced you to the topic of the Gilded Age. We have explained the definition of it. We have looked at the time period it was popular in. We've also looked at the factors enabling the growth of the big industries during that period, including science being one of them. And this video is going to introduce you to some examples of these big business moguls that will propel the Gilded Age. All of these men who were these big bosses and who were able to gain enormous amounts of wealth from or during the Gilded Age. And then we will see, was this good? Was this bad? What are the pros? What are the cons of this big industrial growth? So aside from inventors like, Tesla and Thomas Edison, the Gilded Age is going to give a rise to the first America's business giants. Some people refer to them as, quote unquote, the robber barons. And this nickname of sorts was given to them by the pundits of the time, by the commentators who lived during the Gilded Age and who actually criticized the businessmen. They will criticize how they treated their workers, how they crushed competition, and how they monopolized the market. So we will study three examples of those robber barons, if you want to call them that way, or typically just simply businessmen who were successful during the Gilded Age, successful in terms of the expansion of the industry and the amount of money that they will make in the process. Perhaps the most famous of them, or the one you may have heard of before, is John D. Rockefeller. And he became a wealthy giant of the American oil or the American petroleum industry. And Rockefeller was from Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland is naturally abundant in petroleum. In fact, in the late 19th century, as Rockefeller was coming of age, a lot of different industries will profit from drilling petroleum and refining refining petroleum into kerosene, which was widely used in heating, so heating up people's homes, also for cooking, and also as a source to light people's homes before electricity was widely available to people. So Rockefeller will get into the business of oil drilling, and by 1870s he will establish his company, the so-called Standard Oil Company, in the state of Ohio. Now, if you are a business person, if you own a business, your number one goal is to think about ways in which you can increase your money, ways in which you can increase the so-called profit margins. And the strategy that John D. Rockefeller employs will be to eliminate competition by buying out the smaller companies who are doing the same business as he is. And to use a fancy economist's term, what he was doing is something called horizontal expansion, which means, again, you are in a business of whatever it is you're doing. In this case, you are in an oil company or in an oil refining business, and you are essentially going from city to city in your state or in America, and you are paying cash or you're buying out every other company that also is doing the oil refining so that you can have control of how much the price of oil in America will be. So you have, again, control of whatever it is that you're selling. So you are consolidating, you are sucking in, you're taking, you're buying the smaller companies, and you are creating a big, huge business, also known as the trust, so that you can dictate, you can control the price of that particular product. Okay. And as a result, by the 1880s, the Standard Oil Company will control over 90%, 90% of the entire oil refining business in the entire America. So think of one company controlling the vast majority, nearly all of the oil refining industry. So that was John Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company. And this, of course, it's going to make the Standard Oil Company America's first monopoly, right? Meaning one company to control nearly the entire business. Now, aside from horizontal expansion, the way in which John D. Rockefeller will make money, even more money, is through a method that economists say is called vertical expansion, right? So, in terms of Rockefeller's business ingenuity, he would apply the vertical expansion, meaning that not only would he buy out companies in oil refining business, but he would also want to eliminate any other, third parties that could be part of that chain of supply, right? So he will want to eliminate all the merchants, all the suppliers in the middle of this oil manufacturing chain. So to do this, this means that a particular company, in this case, Standard Oil Company, has the absolute control, again, of the entire supply chain. So anything from, raw materials to transportation, to manufacturing, to distribution of that product, in this case, petroleum and kerosene, will be in hands of one company. So to give you an example of what that means, the Standard Oil Company would not only be refining petroleum into kerosene, meaning producing kerosene from petroleum, they would also have a company that produced their own oil barrels, because that oil has to be stored somewhere before it's sold, right? They may buy a company that owns the drills, the machinery that sucks the petroleum out of the soil. So they will also, the Standard Oil Company will own that company. Later on, they would buy distribution companies that transport oil across America. Typically, that was done by railroad. We don't have big trucks yet, right? We have the railroad system. So they will purchase railroad and purchase companies that transport oil on the railroads. Also, they will purchase the companies that made the pipelines, meaning the system through which the oil can be distributed to individual consumers, right? So one company, again, John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company, controlling the entire supply chain. Why? All in efforts to maximize profit margins and to have full control of every aspect of the business, and to control how much it will cost, say, to transport oil from place A to place B, right? So the goal is to maximize the profit. And remember, how is all this possible? How can one person be able to control a single section of the market so much? Remember, it's possible because during the Gilded Age, we are living in the era without personal or corporate taxes. So it doesn't matter how much money you're making, you can just keep on making more without the fear of the penalty from the government of you having to pay more taxes. And also government, there are no laws saying, oh, your monopoly, your company is too big, you're making too much money, that's a red flag, right? Lack of government control led these businesses to expand so immensely. Next, if Rockefeller was able to monopolize oil industry, a second famous business person of the Gilded Age that will have our interest today is Andrew Carnegie. You may have heard iterations of his last name being pronounced as the Carnegie. I'm going to go with Carnegie. So he became a business mogul of the steel industry. And Carnegie was an immigrant from Scotland. Him and his family moved to Pennsylvania in 1840s. When Carnegie was just coming of age. He was a teenager. And as he was coming of age, steel became one of the cash materials, one of the miracle materials, if you will. And refining or reproducing iron into steel was one of the best ways to make profit in places where, of course, iron was abundant. Aside from Birmingham, Alabama, where, of course, we have a lot of steel factories, Pennsylvania is also naturally rich in iron. So naturally, steel industry will boom in Pennsylvania as well during the Gilded Age. So to go back to Carnegie, to get rich off of steel, Carnegie adopted the same business model as Rockefeller. So that of vertical integration, meaning you're controlling every aspect, every phase of the business, from raw materials, meaning iron, to manufacturing, meaning owning the machines that are refining the iron into steel, to distribution. Again, he too would invest in railroad industry. He will buy sections of the railroad so that he can control the prices of transporting steel from, say, Birmingham to Pennsylvania or anywhere in Pittsburgh, which Pittsburgh was one of the biggest areas where iron was abundant and where steel refining was very popular, right? All that to say that by 1890s, he will dominate the steel industry, and he accumulated a fortune worth hundreds of millions of dollars with his Carnegie Steel Company. Now, last quote unquote rubber baron that we will take a look at is J.P. Morgan, and I like to study him because if Rockefeller and Carnegie were wealthy, this guy was like over the top wealthy, right? Unlike Carnegie kind of came from humble immigrant beginnings. J.P. Morgan and his family belonged to the wealthy class. He was born into wealth in the family of English bankers. Morgan's family had a bank in London, the capital of Great Britain, and in his early 20s, JP becomes representative of his father's bank, or the branch of his father's bank in the New York City. So they're looking to expand their banking market into America. And over time, JP is going to establish his own bank called J. Pierpont Morgan and Company. And within that company, JP Morgan will work as investment banker, which will mean that he would buy corporate stocks and bonds at wholesale prices, meaning he will buy stocks at cheap price because he's buying so much of it. And then he would resell these stocks to individual investors for profit. And that's how he was able to make money. Aside from investment banking, JP Morgan realizes early on that railroads are where the money's at. Railroads are the key to modern industry. So he would start also purchasing railroads one line after another. Why? Because that's what the other two guys were doing, right? That's what Rockefeller and Carnegie were doing as well. And by the 1890s, he alone controlled 1/6 of the entire American railroad system. And as such, he now becomes direct competition to John D. Rockefeller and Carnegie. Again, all of whom we said transported oil and steel respectively and owned sections of the railroads as well. And eventually, JP Morgan became so rich that he was able to buy out Rockefeller and Carnegie, who, again, remember, were already rich as is, okay? So JP Morgan eventually purchases portions of Andrew Carnegie's iron and steel company, as well as portions of Rockefeller's business, to establish a company known as the U.S. Steel Corporation. And the reason why JP Morgan is able to do this is because he's a banker. What does this mean? He has a lot of cash supply at his disposal, and he was able to offer these very lucrative cash offers to his competitors. And that said, US Steel Corporation turns out to be the world's first $1 billion corporation, which means that by the turn of the century, by the start of the 20th century, American business people like JP Morgan will reach their climax or their highest point in this age of this big business consolidation, or big businesses being bought off by even bigger businesses and creating this chain of who has more money than you, right? Now, as we saw, Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, all of them had the nickname as the robber barons because of that reason. They amassed vast fortunes through practices that often are seen as exploitative from the business standpoint, from the standpoint of the smaller companies who are forced out of business because of these guys with a lot of cash who are able to buy them out, right? However, while many business people of the Gilded Age will have these questionable business practices, they will also be known for their philanthropic efforts. With philanthropy referring to, you're given, you have a lot of money, but you have so much, you don't know what to do with it. So you are giving it away for the public good, right? Typically, public works projects, education, you're building schools, healthcare, you're building hospitals, you are funding scientific research, because you have so much money that you want to invest it into something else. So robber barons will give away hundreds of millions of dollars, specifically in the last decades of their life. So as they got older, as they retired, they said, well, I can give this money to my family, and I can also invest back into the community, which, raised me, if you will. And Carnegie, whom we said was the son of immigrant parents, he never forgot what was it like to live in poverty, to live in struggle. And after Carnegie retired, he gave money for the funding of many public institutions like universities, hospitals, concert halls. There is a Carnegie Hall still today in the city of New York, right? And most notably, in terms of libraries, my favorite example, he will sponsor the build of over 2,800 libraries all across America, kind of believing in, making education, making reading more accessible to Americans. And he kind of explains his rationale, his logic behind giving away money to the people in the document called The Gospel of Wealth, in which he argues that the rich people have moral obligation, responsibility, almost like this religious responsibility because they're Christian, right? They have to give money away to the people to promote the advancement or the progress of society. You can read this document in American Yap. I will probably link it as one of your readings for this module, right? So in it, he explains his reasons why he wants to give the money away. Now, the other two guys, Rockefeller and Morgan, they will also have very high philanthropic achievements. Rockefeller will support education specifically. For instance, he will give away $80 million to establish the University of Chicago. On top of that, he will donate money to establish the institution then known as the Atlanta Baptist Female Seminary. Today, it's known as the Spelman College in the city of Atlanta, Georgia. And Spelman will grow as the first HBCU in America, meaning historically Black or Black College or University, or the acronym HBCU standing for Historically Black College or University. Okay. On top of that, he will donate over $500 million during his lifetime which was more than any American before him, to various different smaller schools or smaller hospitals wherever they needed money. And lastly, Morgan will fund several different charities or charitable causes, including educational institution. Specifically, he will give money to establish the Harvard's Business School or the Harvard Graduate School of Business Administration to kind of teach people how to open their businesses, how to make money fast, and things of that nature, right? So he was also involved in supporting education, but also arts, museums, or building of the museums, giving money to cultural organizations, and spreading the culture to Americans. All of this to say, you may hear this and you may have some questions. You may come to some conclusions. Some conclusions we may be able to draw from all of this was that while robber barons employed ruthless methods and squashing competition, monopolizing the markets, they will also have a soft spot in wanting to give back to society. Now, here's the tricky part. We can question why. Yeah, we can say why at the end of their lives would they decide suddenly, oh, I have so much money, I want to give it away. Why do you want to give your money away, right? Are you doing this out of goodness of your heart? Do you actually really care? Did you simply have a guilty conscience, right? So you want to do something before you die? Or are you giving money away simply to compete with each other, right? These are the business people. Number one of business personality, you have to be very competitive to get to the top, right? So are you participating in these philanthropic efforts just to, compete with the other person? You want to give more money than Rockefeller, right? There actually was a big competition between Carnegie, Rockefeller, and Vanderbilt over who can give more money away, and then kind of showing off with that, right? Now, we can question these motives. We can ask why. You can say maybe that's beside the point. It doesn't matter. The public profited from their philanthropy. That's fair as well. So perhaps, we can conclude with this. It's beside the point as to why they were doing it. The point is that there are many ways in which society would still profit from their charity. So we can kind of say they had a mixed legacy, just like a lot of people that we study in history. We shouldn't see them either as good or bad. We should see them as both. Both can coexist, right? Depending on what aspect of that person you want to focus on. Okay. So this concludes our study of the examples of the business people, businessmen in this case, who will be famous, who will amass a lot of wealth at the expense of the workers. Sadly, you will see in the module readings how some workers will be abused by those businessmen making a lot of money, and the efforts they will take to try and fight the big corporations and secure the rights for the workers. Until then, have a good day. See you next time.